Hello, everybody. Welcome to the DePIN podcast. I'm your host, Tom Trowbridge. Thrilled to have Dom with me here, the co-founder and chairman of Hivello. Welcome, Dom.
Thanks for having me today, Tom.
So Hivello is one of, I think, a new kind of generation of projects, which kind of helps show the maturity of the DePIN space, because now we've got a level of DePIN aggregators, which are actually coming through and facilitating access to DePIN. And there's so many projects out there. We're now in need of effective portals to do that. So thrilled to have Dom to kind of explain about what that actually means, how it works, and how he can help people basically get on board the DePIN ecosystem. So Dom, why don't you give a summary of Hivello?
Thanks, Tom. And so, as mentioned, we're a DePIN aggregator, basically wrapping Web3 DePINs in a Web 2.0 environment. What we've seen is that there's quite a lot of complication around running, launching, and managing DePINs, and our view was, there has to be a better way. And so, maybe just in terms of a little bit of background, the team and I have been involved in technology since the mid '90s, and got into crypto in 2013. Both Andrew, my co-founder, and I co-founded a company called Banksa. Banks was one of the leading fiat on and off ramps in the space. So I got involved when trying to onboard crypto was quite challenging, and so I built those on and off ramps in the space and connected it to global exchanges like Binance and OKX and wallets like MetaMask and Trust Wallet and hundreds of others. And so just taking a lot of the philosophies and the learnings from Banksa and applying them into Hivello. And so the value proposition for a customer is they download the application, literally point and click, and within 60 seconds, they're basically mining multiple DePINs. And so what the software does over time is uses an AI agent to optimize what are the best DePINs to run on my machine versus your machine, because not all DePINs are equal in each country.
Super interesting. So it effectively acts as both a DePIN front end and also DePIN optimizer, both, right?
Yes, yeah, and so it's partly there's that part of it, but then there's also just to let's call it go through some of the key features. A lot of the DePINs require staking of their native token, as well as if they're running on Solana or ETH, they'll need the other chain for gas. And so part of the value proposition of Hivello is you will buy and stake Hivello once, and then you'll get access to all of these DePINs that require their own staking. I'm sure we're going to sort of jump into some of the economics around our token and how all that's going to work. But from a pure simplistic perspective, the best way to look at Hivello is it's like Airbnb for your computer. On Airbnb, if you've got a spare room or a house, you can basically rent it and earn income. And with Hivello, it's the same thing. Everyone's got a computer and a spare computer. You can install Hivello, and as your computer shares its resources, your RAM, your CPU, your GPU, your IP address, your bandwidth, you're actually earning DePIN tokens across a number of different DePIN projects.
Fabulous. So help us understand how many DePIN projects, which ones that I think is interesting as well.
Yeah, so as of today, there's about 7 DePINs. Our target by the end of 2025 is to have over 50 DePINs integrated and then using AI to optimize. And the one that we've just launched, Nasana. Nasana is one of the leading GPU DePINs. GPU cycles or hashes are used to train AI models, and there's a big demand right now. And they compete with Akash and GPU.net and IO.net and a number of others. And so, we've just integrated Nasana, and we're now in the process of continuing to add more DePINs. We've got a number of them in the sort of CDN, IP bandwidth sharing space, storage, and so the list will continue evolving and growing as time goes on. And what we're trying to do, we're not trying to pick what the winners are. We'll let the data determine what the winners are. And importantly, this is data that is not available on chain. On-chain only gives you a very small sort of insight into what's actually happening in the DePIN space. And with Hivello, we're capturing a lot of primary data and then obviously using our AI agent to optimize on a personalized basis, a node by node, computer by computer basis.
I mean, what I find so interesting about, there's a lot of things interesting about it, but a key thing is that you also then serve as effectively a customer or provider, I should say, source for DePIN projects. And so as your customer base grows, and presumably, why would I go through the effort of onboarding one DePIN when I could go to Hivello and basically be optimized among 7, 10, 20, 30, right? So if that's rational, the onboarding should really favor Hivello, which means you then are in a pretty privileged space in the ecosystem because the customers and providers come through you, which makes you the primary source of providers of DePIN infrastructure really for all these different projects, which means every one of these, what I would call virtual DePINs to differentiate from the physical ones, are going to very much want to integrate with you, and then are going to be very focused on how that optimization that your AI is, so that their bandwidth, their storage, their compute is provisioned to them as opposed to others. Is that is it reading the ecosystem kind of plan correctly?
We actually don't need the permission of any DePIN to integrate because we obviously live in a permissionless environment. However, we always try and talk to the various projects. And we've had numerous projects approaching us saying, can you give us access to this supply side? The computers are thousands and tens of thousands of computers around the world. And we've said, absolutely, we can. But you'll need to pay us extra tokens, which we then share with our users, with our customers. And so I actually can see customers coming to Hivello because they'll get access to DePINs that they normally couldn't get access to because there is a high degree of technical requirement. But also in terms of the payout rates, we will be able to, even with our fees included, actually for certain DePINs actually pay over the odds. Because those DePINs are coming to us and say, take our native token, share that with their users, and make sure they're running our particular new DePIN, and particularly for new projects on these particular computers. So there's a big opportunity with regards to DePINs and working with those in the space. And at the same time, we're also working on a number of partnership deals with centralized exchanges, because they've obviously got a lot of customers there, and some of the deals that we're working on is that they'll help market and promote Hivello, and then in exchange, when one of their customers has downloaded Hivello, we will connect our wallet at Hivello with the wallet at the exchange to make that whole offboarding or off-ramping process super simple. And so that's just one of multiple relationships that we've got in place.
Really interesting. I mean, I definitely want to dig into token economics in a piece, but before that, let's back up for a second and talk about Dom, you and your team, and how you ended up here, what your path was to conceiving of and then launching Hivello.
So we've been involved. I've personally been involved in tech since mid-90s. Listed a number of companies both on the Australian and Toronto stock exchanges. Got into crypto in 2013, launched a couple of companies. The most notable is a company I mentioned called Banksa. And this is when crypto was new, or Bitcoin was new, and the whole on-ramping was actually quite challenging, because people who wanted to get into crypto, they didn't start with Bitcoin. They started with some US dollars or euro or cash. And so what Banksa really perfected was the ability to onboard fiat to crypto, and then obviously crypto back to fiat. And Banks is doing billions of dollars of transaction volume over the last couple of years. And so it's really been a good learning experience. And then has taken those learnings into Hivello. Andrew Smith, one of our co-founders at Banksa, is also our co-founder here at Hivello, and Justin Rosenberg and Simon round out our team. Collectively, we've actually been working together for over 20 years on and off. So a team that's kind of been there and done it before. And just in terms of, I guess, just to maybe share a little story. DePIN for all of us is maybe only a couple of years old. But my first kind of experience in this whole concept of decentralized compute was about 30 or so years ago. So there was a group, you may have heard the story, NASA. NASA was collecting all of this data from all of their telescopes around the world, but they didn't have the computing power internally to process all of the data. And so they set up a research institute called SETI, S-E-T-I, SETI. And so what consumers could do, and I remember doing this as a teenager, you downloaded this application onto your computer, and every night it would download some of that data, it would process it, and then send it back to SETI, or basically back to NASA. And so this is pre-blockchain. And so the prize was simple. If you found a star or a planet, you could actually name that star or planet. So there was a reward mechanism in place. Obviously, tokens didn't exist at that point, but it comes back to human nature. There's got to be an incentive, whether it's earning cash or being able to name a star. And I remember 2 computers running with the real hope that I'd find a planet or a star. Unfortunately, I didn't, but it was fun to be part of that process. And that was really one of the first real life examples of decentralized infra. And then fast forward to the internet.
But just a question, what would your planet name have been? That's the key question.
I can't remember. I didn't even.
I'm sure you had it. I'm sure you had some ideas.
It would have been something like Domstra or something along those lines. Something with a bit of ego built in. But anyway, I didn't, and so I didn't have the glory of doing that. But it was fun because I felt like I was part of something, and that, to me, that kind of same concept and that same passion applies today. And if you sort of fast forward to the internet in 1995, been involved personally in the internet since then. When we built a website, we would host it at home or at the office on our own server. So back when the internet first started, infrastructure was by its very nature decentralized. And now it's over time that things have become much more centralized. And so one of the real reasons why I'm really passionate about this, because I'm a big believer of decentralization and giving control of infrastructure back to the people and allowing them to effectively earn as part of that process.
Listen, let me take it one little step further on what you said, which is that centralization has obviously dramatically increased and is just a function of the benefits and economies of scale, which the internet kind of is based on. And so there's sort of economic laws that drive economies of scale on a global network. And so but DePIN, the only way to compete with that is not by another centralized business. If you and I went out to raise money to invest in the CapEx to do this, we couldn't do it. So the only shot we have is the only chance of decentralization of I would say oligopolies is by crowdsourced infrastructure, by the whole community coming together, right? And so I take it even a step, exactly what you said, but even more, which is DePIN is the only way you could possibly break these effective monopolies in different ways. There's no other way possible because no one is going to fund any other competitors to do it because the CapEx is just far too high.
Absolutely. And that's to a degree why we've decided to focus on the software side, or I think as you called it, virtual DePINs, because we know there are millions of spare computers, desktops and laptops sitting at home or at the office that can be put to good use. It makes sense from a commercial perspective. It absolutely makes sense from an environmental perspective, rather than this hardware basically being disassembled or thrown out or God forbid, thrown into landfill. So a lot of this infrastructure can actually be repurposed to create these decentralized networks.
Let me take a slightly different tack on it, though, because I think what you're saying is right. But if you look at networks over time, you look at Bitcoin, look at Filecoin, that started off with people mining in their basements, in their homes, using consumer grade hardware. Fast forward to now, Bitcoin is valuable. It's mined only effectively in purpose-built data centers owned by publicly traded companies at massive scale. Filecoin followed the same trajectory. So, question, as any of these DePIN projects scale, as they become valuable, aren't we inexorably going? And by the way, I'm not criticizing that. I think that's still decentralized for sure. It's not one company running it, but don't we inexorably move to this becoming professional businesses, again, open, decentralized, but no longer appropriate for consumer grade hardware? Like, a thought is that this is the consumer hardware is sort of the early stage of any of these networks, and the mature stage of networks to succeed are actually much more enterprise grade hardware infrastructure focused.
I don't necessarily agree with that totally. I think it's going to end up being a bit of a hybrid model, and that will be determined by the kind of DePIN. If you're talking about a DePIN that's about bandwidth or IP addresses, you absolutely need millions of computers, millions of residential or business IPs. You can't do that in a centralized data center, even if it's someone running that kind of infrastructure. I think storage, on the other hand, in terms of that vertical, because of the cost of storage and the economies of scale, I think that makes much more sense in terms of centralized but decentralized. But then when it comes to training AI models, and this goes back to the economics of the infrastructure or the hardware companies, NVIDIA. And I only understood this and the opportunity when I sort of started going down this particular rabbit hole is if I'm a consumer, I can buy an NVIDIA graphics card for $500 up to $2,000. If I'm an enterprise wanting to buy the same kind of card that has the same output or in terms of hashes, it's going to cost me 10 times the amount for the same card because it comes in a rack, it comes with nice software to manage it. It's the enterprise version. But from a capacity perspective, it's virtually identical to my hardware at home, which is 1/10 of the price. So in that specific example, I'd say, sure, there will be applications like there is today. If you, an AI company, you'll go to an Amazon or Google or other to train your AI models. But increasingly, being able to use and tap into the decentralized infrastructure is much more cost effective. Like by a major factor, we're talking 80 to 90% cheaper decentralized as opposed to centralized because of the fact that a consumer grade bit of hardware actually costs much less. So I think there are, because there's going to be a number of hybrid examples, and I think we've just touched on three.
And that's a terrific example of cost, with that having to be balanced by performance and by scale, right? So you have to run clusters, and it's non-trivial to create a cluster from a disparate group of consumer machines, and then that also require a certain level of reliability in order to complete the jobs, right? So that's where DePIN software comes in. That's where the sort of special sauce is, right? And the people that get that right, which is the hard bit, are the ones that will win. Would you agree?
And that's part of Hivello's value proposition. It goes both ways, and so part of coming partly to our tokenomics. Part of what we're going to be able to do when you first start, let's call it, you start at bronze, where just a finalization of the actual naming conventions, and then if you then buy and stake Hivello, you'll go to silver, gold, and platinum. But what you'll do is you will get access to other DePINs that have a certain SLA requirement. And so what we're going to be able to do is to give access to our customers, by buying and staking the Hivello token, but also by certain customers having a certain SLA, let's call it 99% SLA. give them access to DePINs, particularly in the GPU mining space, that have that certain requirement, kind of enterprise grade SLAs. And so that's part of, I guess, the value proposition of Hivello is we're going to be managing that across the board, and we're going to know, whether we go to deal with Exabits or one of the other big GPU companies saying, we've got 50,000 nodes, uptime of more than 99%. Now let's do a special deal allowing us to reward our customers, because there are certain groups like Aethea that only deal at that enterprise level because of the SLA requirement. There's Nasana, on the other hand, they typically have 2 to 4 hour jobs. So SLA is important, but not as critical as that. So once again, this is where Hivello takes on that heavy lifting and the thinking and the technology, and just letting customers, plug in their wallet details, install Hivello, and just set and forget.
Super interesting. And listen, on virtual DPINs, I think SLA is kind of the next hurdle, if you will, right? Like that is where and your implied point, enterprise adoption comes with SLAs. You cannot get it without SLAs, because if you think about you're an IT manager and something goes down, the first thing your boss is going to ask, well, what about the SLA? You can't say, oh, I didn't have one, right? So because that's what everyone's accustomed to. So SLAs are obviously the next kind of, say, technical requirement for us to scale as a DePIN ecosystem. Easy to say, getting them, installing them, enforcing them, that's the trick. And so when you say you have customers with SLAs, are there actual financial penalties associated with not meeting SLAs? Are there, is that related to staking? Does that factor into token economics? Like how do you think about the SLA kind of enforcement and arrangement?
And so today, like what some DePIN projects, and take Filecoin, for example. If you want to run Filecoin, you need to stake Filecoin, and to a degree, what you're doing is you're guaranteeing that you're going to run at a certain SLA, and if you don't, you'll get slashed. And if you go below a certain amount, they'll take those Filecoins that you've slashed. Now, we understand that concept. We're not going to be enforcing anything like that, not at least in the short to medium term. But I think longer term, as we move further up the enterprise space, because there are consumers that will have SLAs in line with what enterprises need, then there will be a requirement to stake Hivello, and we may then look at some kind of slashing. And what I should have also said, when someone installs Hivello and runs it, they're earning the native DePIN tokens that are running on their machine, but then they're also earning the Hivello token. Think of it as the Hivello token as extra APY, and then they can take that token and stake it for a higher percentage of the rewards, in a way creating a bit of a flywheel effect. We're so early in this whole DePIN ecosystem. I think part of this will be an ability to just see what works, what resonates with our customers, and also what resonates with the overall enterprises that are dipping their toe in the water today and starting to use DePIN infrastructure.
Let's get into token economics, because you mentioned it. And what I think is fascinating is you sit on top of all these DePINs, right? You've integrated, I think you said 7. There's a whole number more you've probably looked at closely. There's a large number in your pipeline. So you sit on top looking at a lot of different token economic models, right? Not just the actual service being offered, but the token economic model. So first, what do you think works? What are you excited about in terms of token economics? What are kind of key things you think should be included? And you can either name projects or just name mechanisms you think are important. And then let's talk to kind of how Hivello works in terms of staking and token economics.
My first sort of point there is keep it simple. I've seen a number of projects where you seriously need to have a PhD in mathematics and potentially physics to understand it, and most people aren't at that level. So that's kind of my first point. Secondly, what do people understand, and what's been tried and tested, let's call it in the old economy crypto space. Let's just take exchanges. With exchanges, you go in there, and I'm talking centralized exchanges. You can buy and sell, and if you then buy and stake their native token, you get a high percentage of the rewards, or you get kickbacks or a smaller fee. People understand that concept of a loyalty token. So I think that's kind of like, that's one box. The other is the concept that I mentioned before around Filecoin. If I'm running a network and I'm telling everyone out there, trust me, I will have 99% or more uptime, I'm basically putting my money, my Filecoin on the line, and basically staking it to basically show the community and show the market that I will be there. And if I'm not, I've got a financial penalty. So for me, they're sort of the two that make the most sense because they are the most easy to understand. And I want to talk about Web 2, and I know this is a Web 3 audience, but I just want to I'll talk about Web 2 in a moment. Thirdly, from a Hivello perspective, one of the things that we've seen, each DePIN, the majority of DePINs, they've got their own native token. And then there's another token that you're going to need, if they're running on Solana or Ethereum or whatever other token, they need the gas. So there's this complexity, particularly if you're running 3 or 4 or half a dozen different DePINs, you may require 10 or so, different, maybe not 10 or so different wallets, but native tokens. And from my perspective, coming with the concept of trying to keep it really simple, part of the value proposition of Hivello is you will be able to buy and stake the Hivello token once, and then you don't need to worry about gas, wallets, or the native tokens of each of those particular DePINs. And so I think simplifying that, once again, I stake once and I get access to all of those DePINs. And I think that's another example of the value that Hivello can bring, and the fact that it's super simple to understand as well.
Just agree violently on that point of simplicity. I say all the time that you should have your token economics be able to fit on one page, ideally in a number of bullet points, so people can easily understand it. And if you can't do that, you've got a problem. And there's one project you've already mentioned that I've had a dozen conversations before I could find someone at the organization at the project who could actually explain their own token economics to me, because it was so complicated. And that is, I think, a recipe for disaster. And I'll get it further, which is, one of the things I like to say is DePIN is not a meme. And as the DePIN generates real revenue, it has a potential to attract a whole nother class of investors. But those investors are accustomed to understanding how value is generated and how it accrues, whether it's to a token or to a stock or whatever. And so I think the scrutiny is going to be much higher on DePIN projects for token economics than historic ones, where token buyers have just bought it and this and that. It's been fine. It's going to go, it gets more users, it's going to go up. But we're going to attract different investors who have a far more disciplined and a far higher standard in terms of value accrual and how it works. And so for that, I think it's got to be simple and clear. And all the things you mentioned make sense. The other point I would mention is that stake, I think what you hit is a great point, because so many projects, stake is required by the provider. And at Fluence, we separate that. So if some people want to do providers, great. Other people hold the token and want to stake it, great. Those can overlap, but they don't have to. And so what you're doing is, I think, you're sort of doing a hybrid model in a way, but we think that stake should be separate from actual hardware provision. And so you could even get to a place potentially where someone just wants to buy the Hivello token and stake it. And so me joining Hivello doesn't even have to buy it, because I'm taking someone else's stake and I'm just providing my hardware with no cost.
Yep. Yeah. So absolutely. And as we say internally, sometimes we need to crawl before we start walking. And we're TGing 11th of February on a number of centralized exchanges. So our token will be on chain and available for people to buy and sell. As part of that process, people will be able to, who are using Hivello, in terms of the Hivello software, the Hivello nodes, can buy and stake for a high percentage of the rewards. But we're also implementing, at least in the first 90 days, an ability for someone who's not running a Hivello node for a number of reasons, the ability to take and stake and earn an APY. And your concept, I think, really kind of hit the nail on the head. There may be people that have got the software but don't necessarily want to stake, and vice versa. And so being able to effectively bring them together and build this kind of ecosystem. And this is where where the company's only a couple of years old. We're just going, we're just launching our token. I think these kinds of innovations, token innovations, will be something that we're just going to have to continue building and evolving and listening to our community as well. We've had tremendous feedback from our community to date. There are ideas flowing in Discord, literally on every couple of minute basis, and that's something that we really encourage, because ultimately we're building software for the community.
I still want to get into a little bit more detail on the Hivello token, because you mentioned stake it, node, rewards. Can you kind of explain like a little bit more kind of how that works in terms of which rewards are you talking about? How does that actually work?
So in terms of, let's just to take a step back, someone downloads and installs the Hivello software and basically gets the node up and running. It's literally a couple of minutes or less. They'll start off at a certain tier. Let's call it bronze, just to kind of use the membership program that the airlines use. And they will receive a percentage of the rewards. We're just in the process of finalizing exactly
percentage of what rewards?
Of the DePIN tokens that they're mining. So the way that Hivello makes money is that we take a percentage of all the tokens that are being mined. So we don't charge the customers anything for the software. It's free. And we just take a percentage of the DePIN tokens that they are mining. And so part of that process, obviously, if you're at bronze, you'll get a certain percentage. If you're at platinum, you'll get the majority of it.
So is it the fee somewhere from 50% to 20%, or 50 to 10, or ballpark?
Yeah, so from a customer's perspective, in terms of the percentage rewards, if they're just starting off base, no staking, nothing else, they'll get 50 to 60% of the rewards, all the way up to, in fact, let's call it 90% of the rewards. But then we've got this concept called overstaking, where people can overstake the token for an even higher percentage of the rewards. Part of the, and I've got to be careful what I say here on the advice of my US counsel, but let's just call it, I'll say what a number of projects do is that they'll take the revenue that they're generating, they will then buy the token and burn it, just to kind of reduce the buy and burn. And the reason I'm a little bit sort of opaque around that is because if you make it too obvious or too overt, there's potential SEC issues, at least what our US legal counsel have said. So what they've said is do it, but don't talk about it. And don't make a big deal of it. Now, maybe with the new incoming administration, all of that's going to change. That was basically pre-Trump coming in. And hopefully that does change, because that concept makes sense. I mean, why wouldn't you want a DePIN project to buy their own token and burn it? Because it just reduces inflation. Like that.
And by the way, plenty do, especially in DePIN.
Yeah, exactly. So that's part of our philosophy is, as we continue building and scaling the business, a percentage of that revenue will be utilized to buy and burn. How we decide to communicate that, I think is still on the table for discussion. But conceptually, that's always been part of our thinking.
But just so I can repeat it back, I just put my hardware, I get maybe 50 or 60% of rewards. If I stake, I can get a whole bunch more rewards. But say just make it easy, no one stakes, it's just 50% rewards. That there's 50% then of rewards that Hivello gets. Now, do all of those are used for buy and burn of Hivello token, or how much of that would be bought, and of that Hivello revenue is 90% buy burn, 10%? How do you think about that?
That's an internal discussion that we got internally. We haven't made that particular number public just because we're in the early stages. I'd like to get to a point where it's a material percentage of our revenue is being used to buy and burn, because there's a question of where does ultimately the value creation end up in the equity or the token, or really a hybrid of the two. And so I think, once again, this is something that ultimately, like a lot of young DePIN companies, they start off in a kind of semi-decentralized or semi-centralized model, and then over time try and move towards becoming a completely decentralized model. And we're on that journey, and we're learning every day. We're learning something new as well, and we're just going to basically get feedback from our user base. So, I'm sorry I don't have a specific number for you, but I think what's important is the conceptually and the philosophy around what we're trying to achieve at Hivello, specifically around the token economics.
Fair enough. And I guess my comment there is that market values certainty and predictability. And the more precise that number is, presumably in a rational market, the more value you would get for it. And I would also argue that the higher that number is, it's sort of orders of magnitude more value, right? So it's 50%, it's here, 90% is like you potentially have way more, because it's a much pure play bet on the project's success, right? So extreme, you burn 100% of revenue, then people just have to gauge how much affect the revenue piece, and they know that's going to buy and burn all the token. And in terms of project, you presumably have a treasury, so that treasury is going to have tokens, so benefits also from the buy and burn appreciation potentially, right? So you are that way 100% aligned. The lower that number goes, the less aligned you are with your token holders. If it's 0, for example, you have no alignment, 100% total alignment, and then it's just a spectrum, and how far do you want to go up on that spectrum, and where are you comfortable? For what it's worth, I think DePIN projects are going to move and should move to that 90% range, because otherwise you're looking a lot more like a traditional company, I think.
That's good sage advice in the space.
Help us understand kind of big picture what scale you see. Where do you see Hivello going, whether it's number of users, projects on board? You mentioned you want to see 50. Give us where you think you want to go in the next couple of years.
Yeah. So our target for Christmas 2025 is 50 projects integrated, and then using our AI agent to optimize. We know that there's 1,000 plus projects, and there are new projects that are coming out all the time. So we're just going to continue adding new projects. If I look forward over the next 3 to 5 years, I can see millions. And when I say millions, 2, 3, 4 million Hivello nodes running around the world, each generating, and we've got obviously some internal financial models. We got revenue in the hundreds of millions of dollars being generated over the next 3 to 4 years, and at least from a target perspective. And my personal view is, I think there's tremendous opportunity. And I made the point earlier to sort of talk about Web 2. Obviously, I'm in Web 3. I'm a hardcore nerd. I love the technology, and I love the whole space. But in my view, just to take a step back, I think DePIN is the application or the vertical that will bring the next 100 million people into crypto. And this is why I'm also so passionate about it. Not too dissimilar from banks are. We were taking fiat money, which the Web 2, the mass market, they've all got their US and Euro dollars, and they convert it to crypto. So that's kind of like the on-ramping. This is the next step that, in my view, will bring that next 100 million people in. And so part of the way that we've built Hivello is that you don't need to understand crypto. You can even go as far as saying, I'm installing it onto my computer, and I can get paid in a stable coin, or I can just get paid into fiat, into cash, into my bank account. We're obviously hoping that more people will say stable, or ideally the native DePIN tokens. But this is a way that we can get the Web 2 users into crypto, because I think as soon as someone gets into crypto and actually understands the philosophy around it, they then become a convert, and then they'll tell their friends, and that kind of network effect will sort of continue on from there. And so the way that we've always been thinking about this is absolutely we want to serve the Web3 audience, but at the same time, we want to make it so simple that Web 2 people can come in, because if the more Web 2 people come in, I think the better it is for the entire industry.
100% agreed. And I think that DePIN is something very simple for people to understand. Like, here's a computer, I can now make some money off it. Very easy. I think that even that is more complicated than here's a dash cam in my car to make money from, or here, but be that as it may, the virtual DePINs I think are hugely, um, you know, uh, primed for that. And the other point is, you talk about a couple million. That sounds like a huge number until you step back and realize there's a billion people with computers at home, right? Like, literally. So it should not be, it certainly should be possible. Are there any markets that you're focused on? Because it sounds like these projects are global, and that is actually a real benefit. Is you different geographies are more important to different projects, so you may earn rewards better in some versus other. Are there markets that you're more focused on than others?
Um, right now, we're seeing significant uptake in emerging markets, just because $20 to $50 extra a month
Makes
in
goes
whether
further.
it's India, Southeast Asia, Latin America, it actually makes a big difference. You can feed a family for that amount, while in the Western countries that you and I are based in, you make $20 and you go to a bar and a beer will cost you $20. So it's just about the kind of unit economics. I should also mention that one of our lead investors is a group called Animoca Brands. Animoca Brands is big in the gaming space, particularly in the Southeast Asian market. And so part of the reason they invested, other than purely a financial return, is that they have access to millions of gamers around the world. And so by bringing Hivello to that particular audience, it's going to allow all those gamers to, in effect, earn extra income on their bit of hardware. And the whole play to earn, was a big phenomena over COVID. In fact, it's still in certain markets is a big opportunity, and people are literally spending hours every single day playing. And this is in effect a passive way of generating income. So I think in answering your question, Tom, the emerging markets I think is where we're going to really get a lot of traction in the short term. But overall, I think long term, I'd like to actually target enterprises, and I'm talking 4 or 5 years out, purely because there are tens of millions of computers that are sitting in offices around the world that are utilized 20 or 30% of the time. All of that infrastructure could be utilized. And where would I start? I'd start with graphic design firms because they've got kick-ass machines in their office, with beefy graphics cards. So there's a lot of CPU and GPU grunt just basically sitting idle. And that's kind of, the out golf enterprise. Certain tweaks to the product in terms of how we market, and getting let's call it an IBM or a Deloitte to basically give it a stamp of approval from a security perspective. So a few more challenges with enterprise, but that just gives you a little bit of insight of what we're thinking about sort of post the consumer or retail market.
Well, listen, I agree. And listen, Fluence is in discussion with a publicly traded, globally known company that has 80% excess compute in their data centers. Forget about desktops, just data centers. Okay. So we're trying to onboard them. But the problem, I think, for DePIN in general, it's less about the supply. As we know, there is a lot of supply out there. The challenge we need to prove is demand. And so that's what you guys, that's the one piece you guys, you can handle the supply piece, you're the supply funnel, but these projects need to get the demand and need to get the customers. And that is where you're, I think, a little bit at the mercy of the BD and of the sales cycle and of the success of these projects actually finding the customers to go do it, who hopefully will be enterprises because they're the ones that will write the real checks and have real scale.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think, however, we've heard of the chicken and the egg. I think in this scenario, the egg comes first. The egg is the supply side, and then over time, as the supply side grows and wrapped with some kind of SLA, um, that gives confidence to the demand side. And once again, thinking forward, over the horizon, over the next 4 or 5 years, I can see Hivello right now is focused on the supply side, but there's no reason why we couldn't have let's call it an SDK or an API wrapper around all the DePINs and just expose those APIs. So any organization that wants to tap into decentralized infrastructure across multiple verticals can just tap into the Hivello API and get access to it. Once again, just using the Hivello token, stake it once or buy it once and get access to hundreds and hundreds of DePINs. And I think that, for me, that's a real interesting opportunity. But once again, we've got to crawl before we walk. We're still so early in this space, but that's what makes it so exciting. And actually, an interesting stat that I was at a conference and I was saying where we are in DePIN today is the equivalent of where the internet was, or where we were from an internet perspective in 1997. Amazon wasn't born, Google, Facebook, these companies weren't even born yet. So we're still so early in the development cycle of DePIN.
So 100% agree with that. The one piece I'm going to push on a bit is, you mentioned 4 or 5 years. That is, I would agree with you. That is like 2 decades in the crypto world. Right? Like, people are just trying to get to June right now, right? And so, I think you're right in terms of adoption cycle, but that is a bet that is a harder bet for people to take. Or I'll just tell you, that is a non-traditional or non-historic crypto kind of time horizon. And so it's up to us to show customer success wins way in advance of that horizon, so that there is a clear path to that success. Because enterprises onboarding permissionlessly by themselves, that is not happening for quite a while. And right now it takes a lot of BD, a lot of hand holding, a lot of work, and a lot of product and SLA development, et cetera. And we can do it, and it's coming, but we gotta accelerate that. And that's, as you know, because we're on the front lines that doing it at Fluence, building our decentralized compute platform, right? So we're out there onboarding customers, and we just know some are easy, some take some time. But Dom, listen, it's super interesting conversation. Love where you are in the space, and you're basically helping enable and grow the space, right? So that's fabulous. How do people get involved? Everyone should be downloading Hivello right now. How do they do that? How do they follow you? How do they participate in your upcoming token? Tell us all the path.
Hivello.com for starters. You can download the application there and then follow us on X. And if you want to get really deep, on Discord. So keep it really simple. Hivello.com, X, and Discord. Love to have people on board. And so part of the process, we've got a point system implemented pre-TGE, and then post-TGE, there'll be a point system that will convert into a token. And love to get more people on board and join our community.
Excellent. Well, listen, I'm sure you will, and look forward to having you back on, Dom. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Tom. Have a good one. Thanks for having me.